Hi everyone, it's Laura from Om Tara. I'm so glad you're here today. Today we're doing our Beading 101 class and we're going to keep going with stringing. And like I said the past couple weeks, I just love stringing and crimping. It's such a foundational skill. And so I'm hoping that I'm going to be giving you some fun techniques that you can use for your stringing projects. So today we are going to be doing a new bracelet, and I'll show you, it's kind of a variation on what I did last week with the woven loop, but just a little bit different structure. And we're just going to take that loop, that beaded loop variation that I introduced, I think way back when the very first Thursday class when we did the sun catcher. So today we'll just launch into what we're going to be doing, the beaded loop and button clasp. So I know if you're like me, you have a lot of buttons. I've been collecting buttons since I was a little kid, and so buttons are great, either decorative pieces and also great clasps. And they do kind of make your piece just slightly more unique or a little bit different. So I'll show you how to do that. I just again have a little mix of beads that I put together, and I'll talk about that when you can actually see them. Okay, so here we go. Beaded loop, button clasp. I've got some little turquoise chips. And I've got these really, really pretty mermaidy fire polished beads that I'm going to use. I've got this nice kind of bronzy gold button. It's a shank button. You can see that on the back. This was just from my little button stash, so I really liked it. And I've got some check rondelles in like a old gold finish, and these are another fire polish bead. Let me pull that back. They're kind of a yellow tone. Can't remember what they're called. What this I think it's a travertine. It's called a travertine finish, and this is like a yellow travertine. And then I also have these really pretty seed beads that I'm probably just gonna, maybe I'll just scoop them out right here, because we are going to use seed beads for our beaded loop. Now I'm using size 11 seed beads that I'm kind of dishing out there, but you could go bigger. I know sometimes for people, people are a little hesitant to use seed beads because they are so tiny, but you can use number 8s or 8/0s or 6s. 8s are a really nice size. They're small enough to not be too chunky, but they are more, they're bigger so that you can see them. And then I've got a couple of different pieces that I'll bring in later, and I'm going to bring in some of these pearls. Whoops, I thought I lost one. I think I'm just going to leave them there. I'm not sure if they're going to be too big for my piece. So I've just got those all set up. And so just this is a little aside about color. If you tuned in on my color wheel class, we were talking about different ways of using color. And this bracelet that I'm going to make doesn't really go with the color wheel. Turquoise and yellow are not complementary colors, so there's nothing really along the color wheel that I can say, but I really liked this aqua bead, and it reminded me of a mermaid. It had this sort of mermaidy tone, and so I just sort of went for mermaidy, ocean, kind of sandy colors. And so that is another way of combining colors, is just getting an idea of something and then just pulling in colors that remind you of that. So this is my sort of mermaidy ocean bracelet with like sea and sun and sand. So that's what this is about. And again, too, your pieces, color is so personal. So if you do like a color combination and you can't figure out what it is, or if it's okay, or if it's right, just go for it and just see how you like it. That's my recommendation. Okay, so I'm going to bring in our instructions, or just our little menu, our materials list. And we're going to start out the way that we did last week, where we have our stringing wire. And I'm again using a thinner stringing wire, so 0.012, 0.015. And to measure it, we start with that finished length. So whatever your finished length is, I'm going to call mine 7. And then we add that extra 5 or so inches. So that would be 7 plus 5, and then multiply it by 2. So I have my little example. So my finished length, what I want it to be when it's finished, is 7. I'm going to add an extra 5 inches just for threading things through, crimping, doing things like that. So that comes to 12. And then because we're using wire like we did last week, where we're using two ends weaving in together, we're going to multiply that by 2. So my 12 inches times 2 is 24 inches, 2 feet. So I cut pretty close to 2 feet of wire this time. Let me bring in our bracelet from last week. So when we did our weaving, our woven loop bracelet, because we were weaving in and out of the beads, that weaving takes up more wire. So the more the weaving that you do, the more wire that you need. For the project we're going to be doing today, it's not going to be being woven in and out as much as this bracelet is. So I don't have to cut that extra like I did before. So I'm just basically cut about 2 feet. I think I might be an inch longer than that. Again, I've got 2 crimps. I have 1 shank button, and then I have the mix of beads that I was talking about that I showed you before. And then I've got my size 11 seed beads. Now, one of the focal beads, we are going to be creating a parallel pass through, and if you don't know what I mean by that, I'll definitely explain it to you. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking my 2 wires and beading them. I call them working wires. They're each going to get their own beads, and then they're going to thread through a center bead in a parallel pass through. So those wires are going to feed through this way. So it'll make sense when you see me doing it. But I chose a bead for that. I have these, what I call these ugly pearls. Some of them, I got a big batch of them, and so some of them come with little funny things on them. So this is going to be our center, our little center bead. And then I have another glass bead that I'm going to show you too. This is another option. So I'm going to show you how to use this is just an Indian glass decorative bead. I'm going to show you how to use that as a centerpiece too. So I'll get there when we get there. So I'm going to start. So hopefully you've got that. I'm going to take it away. And I've got my wire here. So I'm going to unwind my wire. Oh, I've got a little kink in it. So, I had a great question about this kinking. What do you do when it kinks? Well, it's really hard. Sometimes you can, let me see if I can get my fingers in there. Sometimes you can take your fingernail where the bend is and get my eyes closer to that, and then just try to bend it backwards. Sometimes you can get it to straighten out, but usually once there's a kink in your stringing wire, the best thing is to just nip it off and just let it go. So one of the things too, when I'm storing my projects, I'll show you what I do. If you're not done with a project and you're in a class or you're beading with a friend or something, I roll my project up like this, even if there's beads on it, and I just take the tail and kind of wrap it 1 or 2 times into the loop, and then I store that in a bag. So sometimes people will take their projects that they're working on and sort of fold them up in their beading mat and take them wherever they're going to go, and oftentimes they'll get kinked up. Okay, so I've got my about 2 feet of wire, and I'm going to flush up the ends just to kind of get myself about in half. So there's my fold, and this fold is going to be our loop for our button. So I need to know what button I'm using first before I even start making my loop. So you're going to watch me just hunt and peck for some beads while I do that, and I'm just going to say 25 for now, and I'll see what happens. So I'm going to put on some seed beads. Now here's a little trick about seed beads. These came from a little vial, but if you do get hanks of seed beads, sometimes what people will do is as soon as they get their hank or their strand, they just cut the seed beads right off and just have them in a little pile. I tend to like to keep my seed beads on the strand, so then I thread my wire through while they're still on the strand, and then I just pull them off as I go, and it makes it so much easier. I do the same thing with gemstone chips, because once you get those darn gemstone chips on a bead mat, they're really hard to find the holes. So I tend to keep my beads still on the strand. If they come on a strand, I tend to keep them that way, and then just pull them off the strand as I need them. So oh yeah, it definitely looks like I'm going to need some more. So here I go. And I'll try to remember to show you my little trick about keeping it on the strand another time. I'll have to put that in my memory bank. Oops, get my fingers closer. I'm just using it like a little needle, and then I can take off the extras if it gets too big. keeping that going. I'm just going to bring them down. Again, I'm going to kind of flush up the ends just so I know. And then I'm going to bring it down and just check. So I'm going to, that looks like it's probably going to be a little too big, but at least I know I can take it off. So what I'm going to do is size this loop to this button. So I need to know my button first before I make my loop. And I'm going to just pop the button through, and you can see that there's definitely, let me get my finger out of the way, there's definitely a gap, like a big gap of space. So I'm just going to take a few off this end. See what happens. And whenever I'm making a loop, whether it's a leather loop for a button or a bead or anything like that, what I want is my, whatever my clasp is, my button or bead, I want it to fit through the loop snugly. So just so that it feeds through. Let me check it. I think that might be one or two beads a little big. The last thing you want is a clasp loop that's too big, because then it won't work. And then you also, I'm going to take 2 beads off and see what happens. And let me bring that back. And I'm going to just, I want it to go, oh yeah, there it goes, snug. So it just pops through, because really its job is to catch this this button and hold your piece together. You don't want it too loose, and you also don't want it too tight so that you can't get it back on. So that looks pretty good. So once I get my loop the size I think I want it, I'm going to do one last check. And I've got my my crimps. I've got some gold crimps here, little gold plated crimps. And I'm going to do a final test of my loop once I get the crimp on. So I'm threading down the oh, let me do that again. I did that too fast. So if you didn't see last week, you're going to need to know what I did. So what I did is I took the 2 ends of the wire, and I threaded the crimp on both ends. And now I'm sliding them down. Sliding the crimp down to the loop. There's my little Joe Louis, he's barking. And again, now that I have my crimp down there, I'm going to test, see if that feels a little too snug. I might be fighting it. I think I'm going to take one side off and add one more bead. There you go. Put one more bead on, and then I'm going to thread it up, and that should be fine. I do take the time to really get it right. So what I'm doing is I'm threading that end back through the crimp here, and then getting back up so that my ends are flushed up. So my ends are even. My crimp is now down at the bottom. I'm going to do one last check. Yeah, that makes me feel good. I like that. And then I'm going to crimp. So I've got my crimp down there. I've got a little gold crimp. These crimps do come almost in this beautiful antique gold. You can get them in all different kind of fashion metal colors, and I was looking to find them, but of course I couldn't find them, but so I'm using gold, so that'll be fine. So I've got my crimp. There's my beads. Now remember, when we create these beaded loops, we end up with those 2 seed beads really close together and close to the crimp. So when I put the crimp in my crimper, in that little dip, I want to be careful not to make sure that no seed beads are hiding or jumping into the back of my crimper. I just really want to be sure that there's no seed beads in the jaw of the crimper, because they do sneak in there and the crimper will crack them. So one thing you can do is just go slow when you do the crimping. So you can see my little crimp is in there in the dip, and I'm just going to squeeze gently. And that way, if I squeeze really hard at first, and there's a seed bead in there, it'll crack. So there. So I'm going to do a tug test. That's stuck on there. It's not going anywhere. And I'm just going to leave it. I like that. If I'm going to bring that up, you can see where the cupping of the crimping is. It's separated my wires automatically. So you don't have to separate the wires. When the little tooth comes down on the crimper, sometimes it will just, as it's crimping them, it'll roll the wires slightly away. So what I want to do is I want to keep that little opening between them, because it gives just gives the next beads I put on a little bit of space. So I'm going to keep that. And I am just now going to make up a pattern. Oh, I want to grab my little my little trusty ruler. And because my wires are coming out of my crimp here, parallel, in a very close space, I'm going to use my seed beads as the first bead that I put on. Now each of these wires is going to get their own beads, and I call them working wires, so I'm going to put a seed bead on this wire and a seed bead on this wire, just to allow the wires to spread a little bit, because if I tried to put a bigger bead on there, they'd be both fighting for space. Even these little guys are. And then I would end up getting a gap of wire being shown because the bead wouldn't be able to fit. So this is a good way. I could even do a couple. Maybe I'll do 3. And my beads, my wires are going to kind of separate a little bit. I'm not as adept with my left hand here. There. Okay, so I've got that. I'm just going to do 3. Now I really don't know what my pattern is going to be, but I do know I am going to be putting on all of these little beads. And I think I'm going to try to pepper in some of these bigger potato pearls. We'll see how it goes. Now I'm keeping my ruler here because my clasp, you can see, is taking up, almost a 3/4 of an inch. I don't know if you can see that. I just did that out of the way. It's taking up about 3/4 of an inch, and I know that I want my finished bracelet to be 7 inches. I really want to be mindful that I have this pearl that I want to end up somewhere near the middle or pretty close to the middle. So what I want to do, if I'm thinking that this side of the clasp is about 3/4 of an inch, and my button and the little beads I'm going to do to make a neck for that to fit is going to be, this is going to take up about 1 inch, then I have 6 inches to work with. So somewhere around, getting close to 3 inches, I'm going to be adding my center bead. So I'm just going to be paying attention to that. So this one I am kind of thinking ahead, where on our woven loop bracelet I didn't really have to think ahead, except that I did put that pattern in, and those of you that saw it saw that I missed the mark on that. But for a woven loop bracelet that is a repetitive pattern, you're just going to keep going until you get to the length you want. But this one is a little bit different because I have a decided center that I want to put in there, and so I'm going to kind of pay attention to the length. So I'm just going to go and see what I want to do. I'm going to add some of these little guys. I'm going to put a couple on this size. I think I'm going to try that one. I like to mix up, not only when I'm working with beads do I like to consider the coloring, but I really like to mix up size and shape. I try to vary the size and shape of the beads that I use so that it adds, again, where you can use color to add a little bit of energy, adding in beads of different size and shape does that same thing too. And I think I want these to maybe sit slightly askew. I don't necessarily want it to be similar, so I'm going to just make stuff up. Maybe one side is going to be a little bit different than the other, because I don't necessarily want my pattern to bump into itself, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So I am kind of doing a similar pattern, but now that I added that yellow bead at the bottom, you can see that my gold beads don't, if I had done exactly the same, these two would have hit like that. And I kind of want it to be a little bit offset, because when I start adding in these pearls, I want them to be offset. So I'm going to do that. So I think I'm going to maybe repeat this kind of a pattern here and see what happens. So I am going to separate out, I think I'm going to do this travertine, and then my mermaid bead, and my gold. If I think too much about it, I'll be here for a long time. And we may never ever get finished. So then I'm going to do that here. But since I offset the very first bead, my beads are going to sit off. They're not going to bump into each other, hopefully. Get that little travertine on, and then some seed beads, spacers, and then my little mermaid, and did I put my seed bead? Nope. And I don't always space with seed beads. I have been doing that a lot on camera, but I do like them. They just let everybody sort of sit separately. Show you that. So everybody's kind of sitting apart. I'm going to do my measurement because I know I have about 6 inches. I have 3 inches, so I'm a little bit past. I'm about 1 1/4. So I think I'm going to add in a pearl. And I hope watching me just make stuff up is helpful to you. I hope you enjoy that. Let me know. But this is kind of how my brain works. So, and I really encourage you to play, just like I'm doing. I came in, I knew I picked the beads. Oh yeah, I like that. So I maybe could even have separated them a little bit more, but I think I'm just going to go with that and just see where I am with my measurement. I'm at about 1 1/2 on my long side. I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to keep my pattern. So this is my travertine. And I'm separating out with my seed beads and my little mermaidy. And my gold. I love these polished gold ones. They're so pretty. And I wanted to do 3. I wanted to get kind of really asymmetrical and end up with 3. So let's see where I am. I'm at about 2 there. Oh, so my idea might work. Okay, so I'm going to go on this other working wire. You can see I'm building both wires together. I'm alternating so I can see how they work together. I really want them to nestle in next to each other well, so that's why I'm working them together. Or I'm doing one side and then I'm doing the other. Yep. Another little gold. And then my seed bead. I'm going to pull up a 3rd pearl. You see where I am in my, oh, I'm just about where I want to be. Let's do a test. Here's my crimp. I'm getting to about 2 1/2, 2 1/4. So I think I have enough time to enough space to do another little patterning, and then we'll see what happens. Since I want to thread both of these wires through my center bead, then I need to do a little fudging here so that they end up even before I go in. So I'm going to see about that, what to do when I get there. So I'm going to try my travertine, my Picasso little guy. I love these guys, those seed beads. And then another seed bead. And then a gold. And then this side may need, oops. Let's see where we are. I feel like I'm growing a little too much there. I'm just measuring it, and I'm pretty close to 3. So I may, oh no, I think I'm okay. I don't know if you can see that. I keep hoping I'm not out of camera. I think I'm going to keep going, and then I'm just going to fill in this space with whatever fits. And I think it's going to be the little travertine, the little yellow, and maybe end with my mermaid. Seed bead, mermaid, seed bead. And hopefully I'm about right. Let's see. Oh yeah, I think if I just put my last seed bead on this one, we'll be good to go. I think that was some luck there. We lucked out. Okay, so I've got my piece. Now, if I wanted to, I'm just going to show you that I'm taking my 2 strands. These are loose and open. And I could have, if I wanted to, taken my wire on this one and woven it through this pearl. I could have done some interesting weaving if I wanted to, but for this project, I'm just kind of keeping 2 open strands, and then they're going to join into my big what I call ugly pearls, because sometimes they come out a little weird. This one's not so bad. This is pretty nice. So there's my piece. So let's see where I am. I may end up getting a little big. Here I am. So my pearl is such a big pearl. It's a little bit bigger than 3. I don't know if you can see that without the glare. So I think I'm going to back it up, and I'm going to take off my mermaid and I'm going to take off this whole little batch here, just because I'm feeling like it's going to get too big. And I'll thread it back through. Now, if I had a bunch of these big pearls, I could just pick one that was smaller, but this is what I have right now. And if you are watching, if you are asking questions, please know I'll get back to the questions if I don't see them now. I think that might be better. And I'm going to go back down. I'm using my crimp here as my measure, because I'm really just wanting to bead 3 inches. And it looks like my pearl is somewhere around the middle. Hitting the middle of the pearl is 3 inches. So I'm going to keep going. I think that's fine. And then I think what I'm going to do is do a mirror image. So I'm going to have to pay attention to what I did on one strand. And I might just, I'm going to do this pattern on this side and this pattern on that side, so that I end up with 1 pearl on this side and 2 pearls on this side. So I'm going to go backwards. And you may need to keep me on track. So I'm going pearl, mermaid, seed bead, mermaid, seed bead. Sometimes I make things too complicated for myself. And then my travertine, and my seed bead, and my gold. So this is the thing that I really encourage you to take the time when you're beading to get your pattern right. Get it so that you like the beginning, because now all I'm doing as I'm going back is I'm just copying, and it's going to take a lot shorter of a time for me to do this side than it did for me to design this side. So really take the time. This could be a necklace, a bracelet, whatever you're working on. Make sure you take the time to get that pattern the way you want it, and then after that it's just kind of fill in the blanks. So I'm going here, I'm going backwards, I'm doing the travertine and a seed bead. Oops, if I can see it. And then I'm going to take one of these chubby pearls, thread that through, and then seed bead gold. I should be checking as I go just to make sure. Remember I did that on when I did the necklace. I checked as I went, but I think I'm doing it. So I've got my, yeah, I got it. And then I'm going to keep going. So I've got my mermaid, my seed bead, my mermaid, and I may stop a little short of the end because I didn't bring a bead stopper, and I really don't want to have my pieces falling off. We'll see. I think I'll stop before I get down to those seed beads down there and just do my travertine. Usually if you have a bead stopper, if you have a little piece of tape, or you have something, I might just rest him under there just so he doesn't start losing beads. So now I'm going to copy this side. So I've got my seed bead. Looks like I might need a few more. And again, you don't have to be using these small size 11 seed beads. You could be using a bigger bead. And you don't even have to be using small beads like I'm using. You could be using chunkier beads. So really, the patterning, whatever you want to do with your design, you can mix out and change out the beads as you wish. So now I have, I'm just going to stop here for a minute and show you. So I've gotten I did my loop, my beaded loop. I went through my crimp together in a parallel pass through like that. The wires opened up, they each get their own beads. They go through the centered pearl together, and then in a parallel pass through, now they're coming out. Now I could have gone through this pearl in a cross pass through, like this. And what would happen, so if I were using this glass bead, it would be sitting this way in a parallel. You can see the whole one, that one end of the bead is here and the other end is here. So it sits long, the bead is going to sit long ways in a parallel pass through. If I wanted to do a cross pass through, the bead would sit sideways like that. So if I had done a cross pass through with this, my pearl would be sitting this way. So it's interesting because when you change up the pattern of your pass through, you change the orientation of the bead like that. So you can use that passing through process to really add a design element to your piece. And I wish I had shown you that before I launched into beading my other side, but hopefully that makes sense. And if I had done a cross pass through, I wouldn't have had to probably take off those beads that I did. So here I go, I've got my mermaid, and I've got my travertine. Let me just make sure, I feel like yeah, and then I've got my seed bead. And I am using the seed beads as spacers, but remember, you don't have to. So here I am. So I've got my pearl, my gold, my mermaid, my travertine, and I'm going to pop my other pearl on. And my seed bead. And then my gold. I was trying to sneak that gold on before I put my pearl on. And then my seed bead. You know, and for me, because I had mentioned last time that I'm very rhythmic in my beading, I end up getting into a rhythm. And so adding that little seed bead is a way for me to stop and make sure I'm still on track. You know, it gives me like a little pause between beads to make sure I am adding the same bead on. The bead that I want on. Okay, so here I go. I've got my seed bead. Whoop. And I think I'm down to the gold. And I'm going to have my mermaid. Okay, let's see where we are. We should be about even, unless I did something. What did I do? Oh, I stopped short on this one. That's right. I gave myself a little shortness. So that guy, let's see what's going on. Let's discover. These guys are bumping a little bit more than the other ones did. So let's just see if I did something that I shouldn't have done. So I've got my patterning in between. I've got that one. I've got my gold and my travertine and my mermaid. I think that looks good. It might just be the size. This guy was kind of hefty. And this guy might be chubby, but anyway, this one is a little smaller, so that's probably what's happening, is that my pearls are a little bit off size. And this guy was probably a little smaller maybe than, I don't know, who knows? We shall see. We'll just keep going. So there is that piece, and I'm going to finish this side with my seed bead, my gold, my mermaid. I like the ones with the little gold flash. They're so pretty. I pulled these out of my bead stash and I was just like, oh, I love those. And I'm gonna get another travertine and seed beads. So let's see where we are now with our matching up. I think if I put that seed bead on that side, we should be pretty close. Yeah, I'm going to put the seed bead on that side, and I started with 3 seed beads, so I'm going to end with 3 seed beads. And on this side I just need to add 2. Yeah, that's good. So, okay, so that looks pretty good. And if I had a space on my wrist, I would try it, so let's see. Oh yeah, I think that's going to be good. So here's my... So once I get my, you'll see, might be a little tight for me, but I'm going to keep going just because I like the pattern. and I don't really want to change it. I can change the length with the neck of the that I'm going to make for the button. So let's just go back, and I want to just start where we were. We had our 2-foot piece of wire. I folded it, or kind of flushed up the two ends, and I created this beaded loop down here, and then I put the crimp, both wires through the crimp. So as I drew the crimp down, it created this loop, and I tested and sized that loop to fit the button that I want to use. So that now you can see that that loop that's the size. I have to take everything off if I need to change the size. Now I wanted to talk to you about this too. I could have made a little tiny loop down here and attach the button so that the button could have been attached down here. But I was thinking about it, and we're going to end up on this side with these 2 wires like we did last week, and if you didn't tune in then I'll explain what I mean. But this end is going to have both of the wires create the loop, and so I thought, since the button is going to be the thing with the most stress, it's probably better for the button end to have both wires going through it. So that's why I chose to make my loop for the clasp down here rather than at the end here. So I'm going to add my button on, and I'm going to grab my crimp. So again, I've got my crimp, 2 wires go through the crimp. So once those 2 wires go through the crimp, they act like they're 1 wire. So this is the length of my finished piece, except for what I'm going to add the button. So this is going to be the look of my piece here. So now I am going to, since these wires, once they go through the crimp, they act like they're 1 wire, now I'm going to put on a little neck of seed beads. So what I could just put the wire through the button and go, but since I went to all this trouble to make this loop decorative, I'm going to make the smaller loop that holds the button decorative too. And the other side of that, the other reason I do that is because the seed beads are going to protect the wire from the wear of the button. So I am creating a little seed bead loop as protection and also for looks. So I'm going to try maybe, let's put on 4. I think these seed beads are going to actually go through the shank of the button. Sometimes the button shank is big and the seed beads can float. Let's see. Yeah, they float right over. So that's especially nice to have seed beads on this wire, because they definitely will, oops, jump in there, seed bead. Yeah, there. They definitely will protect the wire from the wear. Sometimes the shank is so small that you end up having some seed beads on one side of it and then some seed beads on the other side. But this way, we're going to create a real loop out of it. And I think I want to maybe go with 5, so I'm going to make my whole loop be 10. Now for me, if I had made my bracelet just a little too small, this is the place where I can add some extra length here. And it is jumping down over there, but once I go through the crimp, it won't be able to do that. So let me get him out of here. He's being a pest. So this is where I could create a pretty long loop if I needed, even if I needed to add a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch, I could create a pretty sizable loop down here with my button on it. That'll extend the length of the bracelet. And then I'm going to put 5 more on. I think that's going to be fine. And one of the things you might want to test for when you're at finding your seed beads, sometimes seed beads do have a pretty small hole, so you just want to make sure when you're doing your testing that your focal bead can fit 2 wires and your seed beads can fit 2 wires, because they are going to need to have 2 wires running through them. So here we've got let me get that button back, and here's our crimp. I'm going to loosen everybody up just so I can get in there. So now 2 wires came out of the crimp. We've got our seed bead and our button, and 2 wires are going to go back in the crimp, and yes, they do fit. And actually I think you can fit about 8 wires depending on the thickness. 0.012 and 0.015, you can fit about 8 wires in a 2mm crimp. So now once they go through the crimp, remember we did this last week, we split the wires Oops, oh, one just jumped out. Hold on, let me get a little more space. We split the wires. One wire goes into a few beads. I'm going to bring it all the way down to the travertine one just so I have a little bit more space. And one wire goes through this side. And the reason I do that is it just gives a little more structure to the end. If anything slips for any reason, you have at least a tail of wire that it just doesn't fall out right at the crimp. And also it gives, you end up hiding that cut end, you know, not right at the crimp. So I'm going to do the same thing we did last week where I pull the tails, and then I'm going to pull the beads down. I want to make sure that the tails don't fall out, so I'm just kind of pulling on them to give myself enough tail. So I'm pulling the beads down. This is how you finish any strung piece. Pull the beads down, pull the crimp down, pull the tail. And for this one we have two tails, and because I want the tails to kind of shut down at the same time, so I'm trying to keep them, as I pull one, and then I switch to the other and pull it. I don't like yank the whole one side out all the way. Then I pull the beads down, pull the crimp down, pull the tail. Pull one tail. Oh, I think I pulled both. Pull one and one. Usually I pull one and one, but two worked. This is not too tight, so maybe it's letting me do that. Again, this is going to take a little time, so you really want to, you can see this guy's kind of droopy, so I need to pull on him, so the slack that was down in here gets pulled up into the loop, and then I'm going to pull on that one. So pull down on the beads, pull down on the crimp, pull on the tails. Be patient with yourself because this really does take time, especially when this button is kind of pulling the wires in the other direction. Okay, let's see if I have a gap. I have a little gap. Can you see that? So I'm going to pull on the beads, pull on the crimp, pull on the wire, and do that again and again. I think I'm getting pretty close. That looks pretty good. Now if I were doing this on my table, not up in the air, it'd probably be a little bit easier to do. There. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing. I think that looks pretty good. Now, we talked about this the other time with the beaded loop. Because I have this space, so I've got two seed beads and a crimp and two seed beads. When I get my crimper in there, I'm going to have to be really, really careful. Now, what happens when you crimp, it does sort of tighten everything up, so you can see there's a little gap there. I will pull on it once my crimper gets into place, but the crimper once the crimp is squeezed, it sort of tightens everything up. So I'm leaving a little bit of space so I can get my crimper in there. So again, I'm going to try to feed my crimp into the dip. I'm going to see if you can see that. There's my crimp sitting in the dip, but I want to make sure there's no seed beads. Like there's a little seed bead jumping in from the back, and I want to make sure no seed bead jumps in from the front or the back. I feel like there is one in there. And then I'm going to pull and pull. Once my tooth is sort of holding the space, I haven't squeezed it yet, then I can kind of tighten everybody up. And then I'm going to gently squeeze. If a seed bead popped in there, if I go slow, it gives me enough time to just kind of feel it out. Now there's a little gap, but hopefully it'll just even up after a while. Do a tug test, not going anywhere. And then I'm going to use my cutter, go in with the back of the cutter toward your piece, and be careful and nip that tail. And again, take the back of your cutter, go in toward the piece, and nip that tail. So here we go. I've got my beaded loop, I've got my two working wires, I've got my center pearl, I've got my two working wires, and I've got my button. And there's my button and my clasp. It pops through nicely, and hopefully when I try it on it'll fit. So again, I could have, if I had made it just a little bit too small, I could have made this loop that's housing the button just a little bit longer, and it wouldn't have looked weird because I have this big loop on this side. So I have a little room to grow here if I needed to make it bigger, and I wanted to keep my pattern and not change it, but I needed to add a little bit of length here. And you could also make that loop a little smaller if it was just feeling like it was a little bit too big. You can see what I did sometimes. I think when we talked about choosing beads too, I talked about being a crow, and I do that. When I choose my beads, I say, oh, I love that one, I love this one, oh, I love that one, and I gather them all up. And so it helps me, if I don't edit myself, if I just say, oh, I really like that one, I'm grabbing it, oh, I love this one, I'm grabbing it, and I put them out on my table, then I haven't stopped my creative flow. And then when I start making it, you can see I totally even forgot those were there. So you just watched me do that. So here's my bracelet. I'll pop it on. Let me take my pearl blossom off. Down there. And there's my beautiful bracelet. I think it will fit. Oh yeah, it fits. Just have to pop it on there. And it fits perfectly. There's my little beaded bracelet. Now you could do this as a necklace too, just because I made it as a bracelet. You could have a really beautiful center bead and then create that, your two strands going up like that. And what I would do if this were a necklace is I would make my outer strand just a little bit longer. So when you're beading your strands, just make the outer side just a tiny bit longer so that they nestle in and don't buckle the way that these are. You can see right here, they're sort of buckling. I would just maybe change it by a bead or two, the length of it, so it would lay on the neck better. So hopefully that makes sense. So that's our beaded loop and button clasp. I did a parallel pass through here, and for those of you that are just tuning in, a parallel pass through means that my wires are going through whatever it's passing through, which is this bead, the crimp, and this crimp. They're going together. So the two wires are split and then they join and pass through this way. So I've got a parallel pass through the crimp, through the bead, and through the crimp. And you can see when we did our woven loop last week, it created a more round shape, and you can see that a parallel pass through creates a really like an elongated shape like that. So you can use it for the design that you want. Now I'm going to just add a little thing in. Hopefully it's not too confusing. Say I wanted 4 strands here. I wanted to have multiple strands. I could take 2 pieces of wire, fold them, and I could put these seed beads on 2 pieces of wire, and those 2 pieces of wire would be acting like they're one wire. They would go through the crimp, and when they open up, you have 4 strands to do. You just have to make sure that this bead can accommodate 4 strands, and that whatever happens at the end with these seed beads, they can accommodate 4 strands. So you just have to do a little bit of fiddling on that one. But you can add, where I just used 1 strand folded in half, I could have used 2 strands folded in half and joined together down here at the loop. So play with that. See what you come up with. They are size 11, and you can substitute those. You can substitute any bead that I used for any bead. This could be done with African beads. It could be done with all pearls. It could be done with gemstones. You can really mix and match. I have check fire polish, check rondelles, the pearls, and then check seed beads, and that's about what I have on mine. But it can be anything. You can take it and make it your own. So you might have just a certain style that you like, and you can take the technique and use the beads that you like. So there's nothing there that's set in stone. You can just, I like to teach techniques so that you can use the beads that you love and just take the technique and make it your own. But the ones that I did use are size 11, and size 8 would work great. Size 6 might be a little chunky depending on, they might be perfect if you're making a very chunky piece. But for something the size that I did, size 6 seed beads would, I think, be a little bit big. But size 8s or 11s would be great. So if you haven't liked the Om Tara Facebook page, just click like on the page. And I'm so excited to get to 10,000 and beyond. And then also subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's Om Tara Bead on YouTube. And just subscribe. And then every time I upload the new videos per week, you'll get a little notification that they're up on the channel. that would be great. And if you haven't joined my newsletter, I send out a newsletter like once a month, maybe less, maybe fewer, farther between. But on my website, my Om Tara website, my shop is there. I don't know if somebody asked about the crimpers, but the crimping pliers are my Om Tara crimper that I invented, and they're in my Om Tara shop. And you can buy them there and a bunch of other things. And on my website it says join my tribe, so I would love it if you would. It's just, it puts you into my newsletter system, and you'll get notifications when I go to shows, or when I'm on JTV, or if I have a special or things like that. And if you are watching this on the replay, feel free to ask questions. I get notifications and I go back, so you won't be left behind if you're watching it on the replay. There. Oh, and I wanted to thank those of you that posted your bracelets from last week that you made after the class. So do it. I love it. If you do make a piece that's in this pattern, what we're calling our beaded loop and button clasp, post your pictures. It's so inspiring. For me, I love to see what you make, and I know people in our community are inspired too. So just feel free. You can post it in the comments. You can post it just on the page. Send us your pictures of what you make, because it's great. It's so inspiring. Okay, sending you all love, and I will see you on Tuesday. Happy beading. Bye.